Hello everyone, Through here. Welcome to today's presentation. So in today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about this topic of the data lake. This is one of the most common topics that almost everyone today is talking about, right? Whether you're talking about organizations, to just professionals, your brothers, your sisters, your siblings, and even your grandmas are out there talking about a data lake. But it's one of those things that seems complex. It seems like it's a new idea, but when you dive a little bit deeper into it, you start saying to yourself, this seems like a little bit of a deja vu here. And the reason why you feel that way is because it actually is a deja vu. It's not that complex as it seems. And my thoughts on this are going to be a little bit interesting. So I'm going to share that with you here today. And this will be very fascinating to give you an idea or my thoughts on what a data lake really is, and so you can live with an understanding of what a data lake is. Now, what exactly is a data lake? If you Google, and I don't have a Google printout for us to see here today, you will come up with lots and lots of definitions. I'm sure almost every company has their definition, almost every vendors out there has their definition, and even individuals have their definitions, but it all boils down to this one definition, regardless of what definition you use. All right, and here is that definition. Here is the definition. A data lake, right, sometimes spelled as DL, is a glorified file system. Point and simple. All right, point and simple. So now, if you go out there and you hear people be talking and screaming and preaching and talking about, they've invented, the wheel the second time, just in the name of the data lake, just know that, well, you know what exactly they're talking about, all right? Basically, two things. They're talking about a file system, which is just glorified. All right, now what does glorified mean? What does file system mean? Can be a little bit different, but that's basically it. We all know what a file system is. You might be using Windows, you might be using Mac, you might be using Linux, right? Ubuntu. You know what a file system is. We all have a file system on our machine. We store our files in there. You have your images, your school documents. You all store them in a file system. Now, your file system could have a structure, all right? People structure things differently. There are some people that would put everything on their desktop, but there are some people that would build a data lake on their file system. Literally, you might have a data lake sitting on your file system. You just don't call it like that, but it's still a data lake if you think about what a data lake is. So let's say you're kind of the person that likes to organize, all right? You go in, this is your file system here. You say, all right, I'm going to create some folders as such, right? Think about these folders as cabinets, and these folders will be by year. Right, so this is year 1, year 2, year 3. All right, now within year 1, you're gonna put a second set of folders in there. All right, where in this second set of folders, all right, in this one here, these folders would be for your school stuff. This second folder would be for your healthcare stuff, and then you can have another folder in there for your taxes, another folder for your videos and images, and another folder for something. All right, and this could be your own organization structure for your personal data lake, right? Data lake that works for you. That is still a data lake. All right, is a glorified file system. All right, it's an organized file system. It's a way of you've used to organize your data that makes it easy for you to access, to use the data, or to maybe share, store that data. All right, so you have designed a structure that allows you to access, to store, to use, to share, to manipulate, to transform, whatever it is you want to do with all the data set you have. Now, if you look at this could just be running on your Windows machine. All right, this could just be running on your Windows machine. We all have this. We all create folders. I've seen all kind of folders in my days. All right, there are people that would want one giant folder where everything gets dumped in there, and then they use the name of the file to name the files differently so they can find it that way. Some that works for some people. For some other people, well, they want each little thing to have its own folder, and if it's not in this folder, that's a problem. All right, and they use the folders to segment things that way. There are people that just, you know what, they'll just dump everything and then they'll write a little program that would use the program to go search and find things for them. That possibly works, but regardless of which approach you're using or which camp you tend to see, the thing that's common is it's a bunch of data that has been stored for easy or for access, storage, use, consumption, whatever it is. That is a data lake. So you might not be a data scientist, you might not be an organization with $1 million or $1 billion and a team of IT professionals, but you still have a data lake. All right, and that is really the takeaway from this that I want people to take. Don't be scared because you don't have all the, you don't call yourself a data scientist to think that you don't have a data lake. You have a data lake. All right, and if we go with this mindset, right, what this tells us is that a data lake, right, is let me put this here, is simply a design. It's simply a design pattern. All right, I know we're going one step deeper now. So here I talked about the data lake is a glorified file system, and then we've seen how you as an individual can have a data lake. Now I've gone further to say, well, a data lake is simply a design pattern, because depending on the way you design your file system to store, access all kind of data that you have, that could be your own data lake. So if we really approach this from this mindset, we realize that we're just talking about something that is simple, right? But people seem to think that, well, we're talking about something complex here, all right? I can't tell you how many engagements, meetings, conversations I've had with people, and they talk about data lake like the building a data lake like it's something revolutionary. It's not, all right? It's a file system. Now, the underlying technology of that file system might be a little bit different, optimized for different kind of needs and capabilities, but it's still a file system. It's still a location where you can dump data, regardless of the format, the structure of that data, right, for persistence, right? There are some characteristics that are important now in that case, right? So we're talking about things like durability, security. Are you optimizing for loading the data? Are you optimizing for reading the data? How are you going to access and interact with that data? There are certain characteristics that comes into play. What is the cost of even storing data on that storage that you have? There are certain characteristics that comes into play that people now can pick and choose, what flavor of a data lake they want to build. But underneath that is still a design pattern and a file system that you just have to work with. All right. So if we abstract it and go back and say, all right, I am this huge multinational corporation and I have a team of people, or I have a bunch of customers that are generating all this data, and we need to make sense of all this data, of all this data. And your boss comes to you and say, hey John, hey Mary, hey Smith, or whatever your name is, we want to build a data lake. I think our organization should have a data lake so we can store all this data. Now you can pat yourself in the chest and say, yes boss, I got this. I know how to do this. I understand what the data lake is. I know you're not going to say it this way, and you're probably not going to say you know how to do it just yet, but at least you wouldn't feel intimidated what your boss is asking about or what somebody else is asking about. All right, you have an understanding of what they're referring to. Basically, they simply just want a file storage, a system or a place where to dump and store all that data now that they can use. So when we talk about the data lake as such, all right, the reason now where there are different flavors of this data lake could be just because of the different characteristics. Like I talked about, you have to think about security. How secure is this data lake? You have to think about cost. How expensive is it for me to store my data on this data lake? So especially for big organizations, they're not just dealing with your letter from your grandma and maybe one or two images you posted on Facebook that you can store on your local Windows machine. We're talking about companies here with terabytes and petabytes and even beyond of data. All right. So cost of storing whatever data lake they use becomes very, very important. All right. So cost is key. So you're thinking about things like durability. Right. How durable is this platform? Is it gonna? I know my Windows machine used to crash every 2 or 3 years or so, and you lose a bunch of stuff. If I'm storing my organizational data on this data lake platform, how durable is it? How can I guarantee that for the life of this thing, I'm gonna always have my data without any problem or corruption and things like that. All right, and we're talking about storing terabytes and petabytes of data, so durability is key. All right, you're thinking about things like compression, right, and other optimizations that you might have to factor in. Am I just storing my data raw? Am I supposed to compress that data before storing it? What are the implications? There are some decisions that you might make to say, well, I want a data lake or an approach that allows me to compress my data when storing, because when I'm reading that data, I can read faster. All right. Or you might say, well, I don't want to compress when I'm storing. I want to take the hit when I'm reading because I can read slow and it wouldn't be a problem. But you have to make those decisions and figure out those trade-offs for your organization. All right. And then another one is access patterns, usage, and all of that. All right. This is one thing to dump data into one location, but again, it's another thing to access, to use that data to make insights of it. All right. There are tools out there that vendors have to access and to use data. Right. It might be Snowflake as an example, BigQuery, right? If you're working with Amazon, they have Athena, Spectrum, right? Or you might just even be going with just good old Python, all right? Good old Python to talk to that data. And voila, there you have a data lake for yourself, all right? So this whole idea of data lake seems to be made complex than it should be. It's really fundamentally a very simple concept, a file system that just has some characteristics a little bit different from what you get with your traditional file system, just because the volume of data is bigger. So that's really what a data lake is. So don't get intimidated by that. Now, companies now go into certain design patterns of how they want to design their data lake. Some people might say, all right, we'll carve out this area which we'll call a data lake, and then within it we're going to have certain sections where we'll move data around, right? We might put here in the landing zone, and then we might put here in the raw, then you might put in the transform, right? And then we'll give access to people just on this transform site. All right, so companies might have a design pattern that kind of looks like this. So very similar to your desktop, to your Windows file system, which again, we all have data lakes, right? You might say, each time I create a new document on my machine, on my PC, I'm gonna create it on the desktop, and every Friday I'll remove things from my desktop and put them into a secondary folder that has a name, and clean up my desktop. All right, and then as long as you have a method of doing it, right? There is a method is very important, because otherwise, if you're just doing things without any method, rhyme, and reason, then we're just not being serious, right? So it's very important to have that method or that pattern that you follow consistently to manage your local files. Same thing with the data lake. There are certain methods that people are coming up with. They might say, all right, every data that the company has that's coming in, we're going to land it into a landing zone. All right, once we land it into the landing zone using ETL and jobs, then we might say, all right, now after that, we're going to create another area, segment this area, maybe give different access and security to this area, and then maybe do some transformations on that data, compress the data, do lookups, validations, and all of the things in that zone here. And I'm just using a zone because it might be you might even think about it as a separate folder within your file storage, because that's basically what it is. This, we're just talking about segmentation here, right? Physical and logical segmentation. So this is just a basically a folder. And then from there you might say, all right, once we've done that, I'm going to move it into another folder called a transform area and give access to people here, right? Read access, consumption access to people, to my tools in this area. But this is still logical. This is just organizational stuff you're doing. There's really nothing complex, right? So if you think about some of the providers of data lakes out there, right? People who quote unquote provide quote unquote data lakes. All of this started with HDFS, all right, which was just this huge file system that you can use to store data. And as long as you store your data in HDFS, you have a good organization around it, and you have the right tools to talk and interact with that data, MapReduce, Hive, Peak, Scoop, Uzi, all of that. You have a data lake, right? But we know Hadoop in HDFS kind of on-premise hit its limitations. So now we then went into things like S3, which is the popular one these days, right? Which is Amazon, AWS. They have this super simple storage, S3, and you can store data. You get the scalability of the cloud. You get the durability of the cloud at level 9s. You get the cost. It's cheap. It's cheaper than you storing on HDFS. There are certain different ways you can compress your data: Parquet, Avro, ORC, different formats. So you get your compression, optimization. You can have different optimizations for read, write. You can access S3 using HTTP. I think you can use the HTTP or ETL tools. And so you can interact with that data. Now, if you use S3 and create a structure or a pattern that makes sense for your organization, voila, you got data lake for yourself. All right. Your data lake might be S3 combined with Snowflake, and you use that to query the data, and voila, that's a data lake. It's nothing complex. A data lake is not a tool, right? It's so surprising when people talk about data lake like it's something new and novel. It's really not, right? The biggest challenge you face with the data lake is more around the design pattern than the tools you can bring to bear. Because if you design it wrong, then you got more problems, right? You might not be able to access the data, or you might not be able to scale. So really thinking about it from a design perspective helps. So here, HDFS S3, Amazon has a Blob or ADLS Gen 2 now, I believe. All right, Google has I think they call it Blob 2. I don't know what Google calls it. I think the name is just kind of funny. And there are a lot of tools like this, right? You might even just have Dropbox, to be honest, right? You might even go and say, I am going to dump my files into Dropbox. I'm going to figure out a way to query and use those files, right? And if you can figure out something that works, that Dropbox becomes your data lake. All right, or even Google Drive, or even OneDrive. I know some of the IT professionals will say no, but through you're kind of going out of line with that, right? Data lake should just be on S3, but that's not true. It's not. It's just storage, access patterns that defines what a data lake is. All right, if you can store it, design it in a way that makes sense, and have a good access and usage pattern around it, you got a data lake if it works for you. Right, you don't have to go out and be using Spectrum before somebody can validate to say, all right, now you got a data lake. Right, you don't have to use Athena or Python or some tool for somebody to say you have a data lake. So there are certainly best practices that we can follow, but at the core of it, when you go deep down into it, a data lake is just a glorified file system. All right, and for more of a professional speak, it's just a design pattern that you can follow to store data and to use that data at scale with certain characteristics: security, cost, durability, compression, optimization, access pattern, usage, available resources, and a bunch of things in the middle here that defines what your data lake is. All right, guys, hopefully this was helpful. I know this particular one has been a little bit in demand. People asked about this particular topic, and sometimes it's a little bit confusing, right? Especially when you're coming from your traditional data warehouse world. People are very curious, what is this data lake? And because of it can be so many things to so many people, no one really has the right definition, and people are just running around throwing terms, making a lot of money, to be honest, because they call themselves, or they can claim to have a data lake, which could be true or not true based on what data lake means to them. But hopefully now you have the ammunition, you have the understanding, and you can speak comfortably or competently about a data lake. So there's always more if you dive a little bit deeper into this to look at, but on the surface, this should give you an idea. So don't be intimidated the next time somebody is talking about data lake, or if you have any interest in building a data lake or working with a data lake. It's simply a file system that certain design patterns have been applied to it to help companies store data, access data, query data, use data, share data, interact with data at scale. All right. Thanks for watching. Again, this has been Thru. Please subscribe if you haven't. I do presentations like this whenever possible. If you have a question that you want me to do a presentation on, don't hesitate to let me know in the comment section below. I would look at the topic and I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, thanks again for watching. I will see you in the next presentation.